Hi, I'm with John P. Weiss. Am I saying your last name right?
You are.
Okay, good. So we met in person in 2014, I believe, at Jeff Goins Tribe Intensive in Tennessee. And that was like a weekend long thing. But since then, we've just been, I don't even remember when I subscribed to your email list or you to mine, but we've like emailed back and forth, just commenting on each other's posts and offering some encouragement. And so that's been really nice and crazy, especially like recently. Um, we've been kind of doing more of that. So, how do you say it? That you're kind of like dabbling in minimalism?
Yeah, I discovered minimalism a couple of years ago. I think Joshua Becker, Becoming Minimalists, The Minimalists, uh, and I just was intrigued by the philosophy that less is more. And I found that when I got rid of things I didn't need, whether I donated them or sold them, and restructured my life a little bit, it made for a much smoother life. And I found I was more focused. And I started reading other writers like yourself, people who write about minimalism and the value of it. But I don't consider myself, a hardcore minimalist. I mean, there's some people that are nearly, ascetics or, monks. They live a monastic life. And I think, like Joshua Becker talks about, it's not that you can't have nice things, but you have to really think about what you need. Or Marie Kondo with "All Does It Bring You Joy?" So I have nice things, but I also got rid of a lot of things and simplified my life, and that's made for a much more productive and happy life.
Yes, and I can really see that coming through. And I love like reading some of your posts. I can relate to a lot of stuff because you do talk about that in some of them. Um, and so we have that in common. Then also just the fact that we are writers as well. So I'm excited to talk about both of those. And you have a very interesting story of how you were actually a police officer and a police chief for a time in California. And I don't know if you've heard of Psych, but or if you'll be offended, but that's always what I think of. It's a TV show. And it's like set in Santa Barbara. So anyway, it's really funny. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But I always think of that because there's a police chief there. Um, so tell us about that time in your life where your primary work was something other than your creative work.
Sure. So, yeah, the short backstory. I grew up as a kid wanting to be an artist. I was always drawing, and that was something that my teachers would tell my parents, "Hey, Johnny," because my dad's name was John, so I was Johnny. Johnny is a really good artist. He draws really nice work, and I loved to draw. But my dad, God bless him, he was a judge, and he always said, "Have a career to fall back on because it's hard to make it in the arts," which is true. And so while I pursued the arts on the side, I also went to school and college and grad school, and I studied criminal justice. And so I went into law enforcement. I think my dad wanted me to be an attorney, but something about law enforcement I found adventurous, exciting, the opportunity to help people. So I got into law enforcement. And so for 26 years, I worked in Scotts Valley, California for the Scotts Valley Police Department. And I worked the entire constellation of jobs from patrolman to detective, sergeant, lieutenant, and eventually police chief. And I got to do a lot of amazing things in my career. I got to be a composite sketch artist, where I kind of leveraged my art background. I got to be a teacher. I taught juvenile programs in the schools. I was a hostage negotiator, a trainer, so a lot of different things. But throughout my entire police career, less so when I became police chief, but I also moonlighted as a political cartoonist. And I drew political or editorial cartoons for newspapers, the county newspaper, local newspaper. Sometimes they got me in trouble because people knew I was a police sergeant in the police department when I was drawing these cartoons. But I kept my hand in it. And then in later years, when I realized I couldn't keep drawing political cartoons, I started studying landscape painting and painting. And I went off to Idaho and studied with a famous painter there, Scott Christensen, and really got a taste of that. So I always kept my hand in the arts. And I was writing too. I wrote articles for the local newspapers. And I enjoyed a 26-year career in law enforcement. It was a wonderful experience. And a lot of those life experiences inform my writing now. I've been a reader my whole life, but those life experiences really help me with a lot of the stories and the anecdotes that I share in my writing.
Yes, and I love those, and I think that's a lot of what draws your audience as well. And yeah, it's so fun reading about that. And I've had some of the same experience where I wanted some kind of way to pay off my student loans, and so I just went into whatever I could do that I thought was, something that's still fun, but it wasn't writing. And so I learned so much, though, that has gone into my writing since then, even though that was years and years. So I do definitely encourage that and relate to that. So, okay, so how did you balance like the work, the family, and the creativity? How did you make time for all of that? A lot of people can just be like, we'll just push that to the side. It's not as important.
Right. It's really hard. I've written about this. It's very important that people find space for their passions. Look, most of us have to work. It's rare we get to be, a full-time writer or artist. It can happen, and some people can make that happen, but most of us have to make a living, and we tend to be double dippers. We have a full-time job and a part-time job. I called it pragmatic juggling. I got really good at managing my schedule, which I'm sure you probably have as well, and a lot of other creatives. I learned to say no to things. I was in a service club for a number of years, and I finally realized that the service club, while they did great work, really cut into my free time. There was always weekend events they wanted us to do, and they were great events, but I realized I had to learn to say no to things in order to carve out time. I used to golf many, many years ago because a lot of people golf to play in the local law enforcement charity golf tournaments. But I found that they would eat up my weekend playing golf. And I wasn't a very good golfer anyway. And I thought, well, how come I'm not painting on the weekends? How come I'm not writing or reading or doing the things I love? Then when you factor a child into this, I have a son, he's 22 now, but when you're raising a child, that's a whole other responsibility. Not to mention just exercise, your relationship with your spouse or significant other. So I became a pragmatic juggler, got up early. Sometimes I stayed up late. I would carve out lunch hour time at work. Instead of going to lunch, oftentimes I would work at my desk and have a sack lunch at work. I got really good at managing my time, saying no to commitments that weren't really that important. And that sometimes is hard for people to do because you don't want to disappoint people. But you've got to learn how to tell people, hey, I'd love to do that, but I already have a commitment. And that's the other thing. I used to write down my schedule in my calendar. So I already had it written in my calendar. If I got a phone call from someone asking if I'm available on Saturday morning at 9 or Wednesday night, I could look at my calendar and say, nope, I'm busy then. Well, I was busy because I wrote in there that I'm going to be painting that hour, So that's kind of how I did it. I became a pragmatic juggler.
That's awesome. Yes, that's so helpful and needed. And yes, definitely. Okay, so tell us about a time when you've been discouraged with your writing or your drawing, because I see you and I see everyone loves you and all the success you have. And I'm just, from talking to other creatives, I'm like, okay, I know that isn't always how you feel. So share with us one of those moments for you.
Well, I could probably tell a lot of stories, but just, everybody loving me. I get comments all the time. If you blog, if you write publicly, you're going to get haters. You're going to get people that just write the darndest things, and you think, man, where did this person come up with that? And sometimes, and once in a while, the criticism is justified. You write something, and someone says, "You're a misogynist. You're a sexist," and oh, you know what? I can see how maybe the way I phrased that sounded poorly. So, but that being said, I'm going to be honest with you and your audience. As soon as fall of last year, I considered quitting blogging altogether. And I was already starting to gain some success on Medium. I had a growing audience, but I just felt discouraged because so much of online writing to be successful depends on things like sound copywriting, clickbait titles. If you don't have a good title for an article, it doesn't matter how good the article is, no one's going to read it. I found the blog just the other day. I won't mention the name of the blog right now, but it's splendid. It's a woman who writes. She's a fantastic photographer. She takes these just beautiful, hypnotic photographs, and she writes just lyrically. And she has 0 comments on her blog, and I don't know what kind of traffic she gets, but her headlines are beautiful, short, capture the blog posts, but they're not going to capture attention from readers because she's not employing those techniques you need to get readers. So I almost quit last year because I was disillusioned with the whole process, that some of the best writing that I've read, and even some of the best stories that I've written over the years, actually were a couple years ago when I wasn't using copywriting so much for my titles, when I was writing from the heart more. And now I'm trying to find a balance between writing what I believe in that can help people and inspire people, but still write in a way that I'm going to get people to read it. Because what's the point of writing these things if they're ignored? So I've been disillusioned, probably like a lot of people online. It's really hard to build an audience, and and some people don't write for an audience; they just write for themselves or to inspire a few people, and that's fine. You don't have to make a living at this. In fact, some of the best writing I've read online is from people who aren't trying to grow an audience or a list. But yeah, I've thought about quitting before, and then things picked up, and I regrouped and said, no, I need to keep at this because I love to write, and I just need to find the right balance.
So is that what encouraged you to keep going, was starting to hear from more people in a positive way, or what are some other things that helped you to continue when you are discouraged?
Actually, it was a little bit more the opposite for me. It was there's an artist that I follow. He's not a writer. His name is Jeremy Mann, Mann, and he does fantastic paintings. I just drove down to Santa Fe last year to go to one of his art openings. He had a huge following on Instagram. He had, I think, almost 180,000 followers. So that's just mind-boggling, right? I mean, we're happy if we get a few hundred when we first start, But what does he do? He's so disillusioned with social media and the likes and the superficiality of it at times, that he walked away from social media, and he said, hey, if you want to follow my art, go to my website, Jeremy Mann, or I think it's redrabbit7.com is his website. But he just walked away, and now the galleries that show his work, they still maintain his Instagram account, so his work is still out there. But he said he just got disillusioned with trying to get the likes and the followers, and he wanted to just focus on doing great painting. Now, someone could argue that, well, yeah, he can afford to do that because he's already got a huge following. And maybe, the only reason why I found out about him was because of Instagram. That being said, though, he kind of inspired me to think of things differently, that I need to focus on doing great work and then put it out there. And the cream sometimes rises to the top. Yeah, you still have to be, tactical with how you do things, but I started letting go of this worrying about an audience or how many people follow me or how many people signed up for my newsletter. And I just started to work more on the writing and the artwork. And that seemed to save me a bit from worrying about it.
Yes, that is so good. Oh, man. Okay, so you recently shared with me about how you drew a cartoon of Joshua Becker, we mentioned, and I guess he saw it on Twitter and eventually contacted you to do a blog post for him on becoming minimalist. Have you had that experience with other people, like seeing your stuff and being like, hey, come do something for me?
Not a ton. The Joshua Becker thing, I think, was just serendipity. We have a mutual friend, a guy named Brian Gardner, who is just an amazing designer. He's sort of a minimalist designer, WordPress designer, and he does these amazing websites. He's worked with Copy Blogger, and he and I connected because, in fact, he's the one who designed Joshua Becker's website, Becoming Minimalist. And I'm not sure how Joshua found that cartoon I drew of him. I did it for a blog post, and I think maybe Brian Gardner told him about it or showed him. But Joshua liked it, and he shared it on his Facebook page. And so that's how he found out about little old me, was my little cartoon. And then at some point, quite a time later on, out of the blue, he just contacted me and said, hey, John, I think I'd written an article maybe that touched on minimalism, but he reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to do a guest post on my site? I said, well, heck yeah, I'd love to. That'd be an honor. I love his website and I love his message. And so that's how that happened. And I was very excited to see not too long ago that you yourself had a nice article on there too. So
Yes.
congratulations
Yeah,
for your.
you definitely inspired me there. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I don't know if I didn't even realize he was still accepting guest posts because it's not really on his site or anything. So, um, yeah, so that's really cool. Like, something you could have never really planned or didn't really expect, but that's
But
really cool.
there is a lesson, Megan, and it's that if you don't put your work out there, if you don't consistently put stuff out there, then these opportunities won't happen. It's easy to get discouraged, and sometimes you have to change the way you're working. If you're not getting any attention at all, then maybe you have to look at your writing or your artwork or whatever you're putting online and say, what can I be doing differently to make this better, to make this of more interest to people? You hear a lot of experts out there talking about how you have to solve people's problems. That's partly true, but you also have to entertain people. I think I'm not trying so much to solve people's problems. I don't have all the answers as much as I'm just trying to inspire people or entertain people with my stories and articles. And sometimes I try to share useful information that solves problems, but um, other times I'm just trying to entertain. But you got to put your work out there, and you've been putting your work out there for a while now. People have seen your writing and your photography, and because you're out there, you're making connections with other writers like myself and others, and that's how in this business, that's how things happen. It's meeting people, it's making connections. You never know when that opportunity is going to come along. And one guest post isn't going to make you famous. I mean, it's just one more thing in building a reputation. And people who write online or share work online, they have to look at the long game. They have to love what they do, whether they ever make it, successful or not. They have to love their work, and then they just have to put good work out there, and it takes time.
Yes, I was just gonna say, like, it feels like the slowest process ever, but
Yeah,
it is fun, and there are those little moments along the way that keep you going.
absolutely.
So okay, um, let's go back to talking about minimalism, or like for me, I refer to it more as decluttering, and like I was a major pack rat kind of thing. So you said that started a couple of years ago. What was the process like for you?
Well, I think it was a process of change in my life as I became more successful in police work, particularly when I became a police chief. Um, I realized that I had to become very efficient with my time. And so after a while, I look at my office and how it was organized. And I really have to credit my wife, Nicole, because she's a very organized person, more so than I was. I was never a slob or anything like that, but I just, I didn't put much thought into decluttering and keeping things simple and the value of that. But when I became police chief, that was a big job, and it really took a lot of my time. And so I got a lot of help from her. She came in and helped me organize my office at the police department and put up these great. She was a photographer, put up some great prints, and I started reorganizing my office. I think it was around that time I started reading more little bits about minimalism, and then it was a process over time. Eventually, I started learning more about minimalism. I started realizing I could organize my time better. I didn't need things in my office. I didn't need the clutter, and I loved how it felt when I decluttered. I just loved it's addictive once you start. We also went through a major move, a couple of years ago, and that is another process of going through things. I thought I did a pretty good job of decluttering and minimalizing, but when we moved, I still found stuff that I was able to donate, sell, or just get rid of, and that feeling of the weight being taken off you is just wonderful. It reminds me, if you ever saw the movie, it's called Up in the Air. And it's this wonderful movie with George Clooney where he plays a guy who works for a company that goes around basically firing people. Companies, they need to fire somebody, they don't want to do it, so they bring this guy in and he does it. Well, he has a side business where he gives inspirational lectures to people. And in his lecture, you can find this on YouTube, the clip of this, it's great. But he walks in with a backpack and he calls his lecture, I think, "How heavy is your backpack?" And he puts the backpack down. He says, "Now think about what's in your backpack. You got the mortgage, you got the kids, you got your relationship, you got work, you got your car, you got your car." And he goes through this whole spiel about how the more stuff in your backpack, the more it weighs you down. it was a great analogy for in life how all the stuff we own can weigh us down. The clutter weighs on our minds, the digital clutter, the stuff in our drawers, in our closets, in our garages. I mean, people's garages aren't used for cars, they're used as overflow. So I remember that movie was inspirational too in thinking about, how to live your life. So there were a lot of things. It was gradual for me learning how to declutter, and then the minimalism movement just got bigger and bigger, and sort of following it more. And so that's really how I kind of got to where I am now, where I really downsized and simplified.
That's awesome. Yeah, my next question was going to be if your family was on board. So that's really nice. My husband is kind of the same way. I mean, he's military anyway, so he's done a lot of moving, but and also he's very organized. I feel like he can have more stuff than me just because he can just yeah, it's amazing. Um, so okay, I'm so glad you mentioned digital clutter because I have been so amazed at how much content you're able to produce. And I feel like part of it is probably because it seems like you have uh, some sort of something you're doing with your time online. And so I was just wondering kind of, um, gosh, how you manage your time throughout the week. Like, do you have some sort of habits like regarding email? You said you don't even, you said you're not on Facebook a lot, but then I'm like, oh, you've got like over 2,000 followers on there, and I see your posts. I didn't know if someone else is posting for you or you're using something else to post. So break it all down for us. Let us see what it's like kind of behind the scenes for you.
Sure. Well, so my schedule, I basically, my wife is a nurse. She was a hospice nurse in California. Now here in Nevada, where we live in Southern Nevada, she works 3 days a week. She takes care of a gentleman in his home on a respirator. And so on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, that's when she goes to work. I use the weekend days to do my research and my writing for my articles. I typically shoot for one article a week. I used to do more, but what I found is that the cartoon illustrations that I pair with a lot of my articles take time. I tend to draw them online on an iPad. When I started, I used to draw them on paper with pen, and I wait for the ink to dry. Then I watercolor them in. Then I put them in a scanner and scan them up to the computer. And it was this whole process, right, to get them out there. It's a lot of work. I mean, sometimes when I was traveling, I would just draw the drawing, color it, and then take a picture with my iPhone and use that as but it doesn't look as professional on an article. So a couple of years back, I invested in an iPad Pro and use an app called I forgot, Procreate to illustrate the cartoons. It's much faster. But I spend my weekends doing my writing and doing the cartoons for my article, and I shoot for one a week. I try to make it a good article each week, and that's it. That's pretty much been my writing is one article a week, and I try to make it the best article I can. And then during the rest of the week and every day of the week, exercise is a part of my life. So I have two dogs. Every morning and every afternoon, we're outdoors going for long walks. I was going to the gym, but they closed the gym here in town. So now I'm having to modify my workouts at home. But I also spend time reading. And of course, I'm a painter too. So I try to use my time during the week to do artwork. Now with this whole coronavirus that's changed all of our lives, I'm investing a lot of my time at home where I was going out and meeting people for coffees and things like that. And I've been taking online courses. So I just finished a charcoal portrait sketch drawing course, and now I'm in the middle of a figure drawing course to be followed by an anatomy course. So I'm trying to use my time wisely. But I'd say, the best advice I can give anybody is intentionality. I know that's a bit of a maybe a cliche or a buzzword, but you got to get really intentional with your time. It's amazing. When I first retired, I could fritter away half the morning getting online, or I turn on a movie, and next thing, or I'm in a book, and that next thing, half the day's gone by. So you have to get really intentional about your day. So each night, I either in my phone or I have a journal. I write down my goals for the week and what I want to focus on each day. I kind of have a routine already in place. But sometimes I have specific goals. If there's a course I want to do, or if there's something I want to work on. This year, right now, I'm sort of in a learning mode where I want to teach myself things to share with my audience later. I want to learn how to do photo editing better so I can start doing some videos and things like that. But intentionality is the key. It's knowing why you're doing what you're doing and getting things done. I also like to batch my time. If I'm doing laundry, I can listen to a podcast. If I'm going for a walk with the dogs, I can listen to a book on tape on my phone. So I try to be productive that way. But I think being intentional is how you succeed.
So do you, you mentioned Medium, do you post your weekly blog post on your own blog as well as Medium, and it's just the same thing pretty much?
Pretty much. I crossed up. Medium really has been a boom for me. You know, I've done some guest posting. I was privileged to do a guest post for Jeff Goins. He had me on one of his podcasts a couple years ago. It was great to be on that. But what I found is guest posting is helpful. You can gain, people can learn about you that way. You can get some followers. Certainly, writing for Joshua Becker was huge. I think I had like 300 newsletter subscribers. It was amazing, you know. So I have to thank him for that. But the reality is that Medium was really, I think, what helped me the most as far as exposure. It's just such a ready-made audience. You can put out a WordPress or a Squarespace, blog, and there's millions of other blogs out there. So it's really hard to penetrate and get people to take a look at your work. Medium, at least, you can write there, and there's a ready-made audience. And they have a wonderful writer partnership program where you can lock your posts in, and people that pay $5 a month go towards paying authors, writers, for their articles. And so I had a really good year last year writing on Medium, and the income has been great. It was unexpected. So that's something that I hadn't expected, was to run into a program like that. If it wasn't for Medium, before that I was writing for a smaller website called Fine Art Views, and I was doing kind of creative writing articles and whatnot, and that was great, but wasn't really making any money, and I had a smaller readership. So getting your work out there on different websites that are large and have a large audience is key, I think. But it's also key that you have your primary website, because you never know if these other websites go belly up. I mean, tomorrow Medium could close shop or change their algorithm. We've seen that with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So it's important to have your primary website to put your work out on, and then cross-post. And the last thing is as far as social media goes, I'm kind of tactical about that. Facebook, I plan to rededicate putting content on. I haven't put anything on there in quite a while. I just fell off the map a bit. Once in a while, I put something on there. Instagram, I was putting artwork up, but then I stopped as I've been going through this whole reinvention period of my art, my writing. But I do plan to start leveraging that, because I get a lot of traffic from Facebook, even though I'm not using it that much. So I do think that these social media outlets, you have to pick which ones work for you. But there's no question that they can drive traffic to your site, get people to see your work. But you have to be consistent, which I have not been lately. So I need to improve on that.
Oh, man. Yes, it can be a lot to do and keep up with. But yeah, that's really good to know about Medium and everything too, because I've heard of it, but I haven't used it very much. Okay, so let's see. Okay, yeah, so we already hit on your newsletters, and I do want to say a little more about that, because you mentioned like researching for it and stuff. I'm just like so impressed, because they're you mentioned there's like multiple cartoons on each one, and you pull quotes from other people and unite it in this really nice on this topic that's really just kind of relatable to pretty much anyone for the most part, from what I've seen. So yeah, I'm really impressed with that, and so I'm glad you shared the backstory of that. I also like that you say, like, I just focus on one a week, because I definitely, when I first started, that was years ago, I thought like, oh, you have to blog every day. And I quickly learned that that wasn't going to happen. And so then I went to the opposite end, where it's like, okay, well, I haven't even blogged once this month. So once a week is really, has really worked out a lot better. And
let me say newsletter. You reminded me of something. I experimented over the years with newsletters, and it really is an art form unto itself, whether it's a newsletter or an email list, whatever you want to call it. But when I first started, I used to just write an article, and then I would send it out as a newsletter. In fact, I think when I was using MailChimp years ago, I had my old blog. I used to have a WordPress blog. I have a different platform now, but my old WordPress blog with MailChimp, you could literally, once you published an article, you could set it up so it would go right on out to your readership as a newsletter. The problem with that is some people started, unsubscribing because like, well, I can just go to your website when I want to read an article, and I thought I was signing up for fresh content, and this is just, what you wrote this week. So one thing I changed over the last couple of years with my newsletter is I don't just share the article I wrote that week. I usually share a brief introduction, a short, whatever I've been thinking about or working on. Usually I share sometimes a quote from something I've read, or some little piece of information. It doesn't have to be much, but it personalizes the newsletter so the reader doesn't just get, your latest article. They get a, hi, it's John. This week, I went for a run and I talked to this guy and he started sneezing and I ran, or whatever, it's just something. And I usually have a cartoon to go with it, a short, catchy title with the newsletter. And then beneath that, I'll have, here's my latest article, check it out, with a link. I used to put the whole article in my newsletter. Some people preferred that. But what I found was it just took a long time to put all the artwork in the newsletter and everything. And it got easier to just put like one or two cartoons and in the beginning of the article, and then I link it to their article. And also that drives the readers to your website, so you're getting a little bit of traffic, which helps. But I think it's important to make your newsletters personal. And the other thing is you've got to be careful about brevity. You have to be brief. They don't have a lot of time. They don't want to read. I noticed some of my readers, they sort of page mark my newsletter, and I hear from them a month later. Oh, I love that newsletter. Thanks. I'm like, I wrote that like a month ago. But that's okay. I'm glad that they read it. So I'm always experimenting with the newsletter, and oh my gosh, I've gone through so many different ideas, and sometimes I get demoralized because it's work to do that too. But I think it's important to give people sort of a little bit of fresh content, not just the article.
Yes, that is so good. I am one of those people, by the way, who I've realized I have to just go through my email and then I will, I have yours. Yours are one of my top priority, but I do find myself being like, okay, but I want to wait until I have a little longer to actually read the whole thing and just enjoy it. So I'll read a few of them at a time and it'll be like months later. So, another thing is I had a similar experience with my newsletter where, oh my goodness, I was thinking, someone recently emailed me like, oh, I love the way you do your newsletters. And I'm like, she's like, I'm kind of new, but I love that. And I'm like, yeah, if you were here from the beginning, you would be like, oh my goodness, because it was crazy. I'm just, almost where it's like, oh, it's just embarrassing to think of how they were before. But I had to just figure out what worked for me and for my audience. And so part of a big part of that was reading, realizing which newsletters I actually read consistently. Right. And I was like, okay, one day it finally just clicked. I actually first started by doing what Tim Ferriss did. He has a 5-bullet Friday, and he just did kind of lists 5 things and links to them, his favorite such and such, his favorite quote, his favorite product, what he's reading. And so I did something similar to that and just played around with that for my readers. And then one week I didn't include a book recommendation and somebody emailed me like, hey, that was my favorite part. So added that back in, and that kind of thing will happen when you just kind of experiment. And now I've started doing, maybe 3 paragraphs before that section, where I just write a story about my week. And that's something I've seen from a different, from John Acuff, actually, that I'm like, man, I always read his emails. They're so relatable and just quick, like you were saying, and so that's kind of where I got my email list. And it's really shown from my readers, how they're actually responding to it a lot more. So,
we've seen a lot of writers too experiment with their emails. I followed James Clear for a few years, the author of Atomic Habits, And when he started, he used to share his long articles on his emails. And now in recent years, he's gone to this 3-2-1 formula, like 3 ideas from him, 2 quotes, and 1 takeaway. Probably because he's gotten more successful as a writer, he can't put out all these long articles all the time in these emails. So he's found another way to stay connected with his audience. And I really appreciate it because they're always inspirational, thoughtful ideas he shares, but it's in quick bites. And I try to do that too with my stuff, is where I'll share a quick intro and maybe something inspirational. And then, oh, here's the article if you want to dive into that. But, I know not everyone maybe read the article. They come and go. So you have to keep experimenting. And you also have to try to come up with new ideas, because what a lot of us do is we copy what successful people are doing, but they've already done it. So sometimes the idea is to dream up a new approach and experiment. Sometimes your new approach may be something no one else has done, and it's going to set you apart.
Yes, that is so important too. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so now I just wanted to talk about another thing we have in common, and that is fountain pens. So your father passed that on to you. It was actually my husband who introduced me to them, so it's fairly new for me. And I think you do more of like the classic stuff, whereas like I have this like new bright pink and like I don't know, just fun little pen, but we've got so many of them. And are you going to show me your collection?
I'm walking over to, I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not. Let me see if I can. It's probably too dark, but
Oh,
these are
no, I
all,
can see.
let me see here. So
Oh, yeah, you have a lot.
it's filled with fountain pens. Um, I've got I've got every kind of fountain pen known to man. My wife's bought me beautiful fountain pens, classic fountain pens. My dad wrote with them, and so I've always loved the way they write. They're so artful, and I'm also in love with all things sort of analog. So I've got like an old typewriter lamp in the corner there. I don't know if you can see that. It's probably too dark, but anyway.
Yeah.
I just love old fountain pens and old things. Typewriters, I just love them.
Yes, I remember your article about that lamp. That was awesome. It's super cute. So for the fountain pens, it's so funny. I have this journal, and this was before I met my husband. It looked like that, like black and just all scraggly, whatever. And now it's like bursts of color, and my light is really bright. But anyway, do you use colorful inks, or do you just stick with like black and blue?
I've been partial to black. I experimented a few years ago with some of the Mont Blanc different color inks, but I just found that I've always liked the contrast of black against a light paper. I appreciate people who write with different color, but for me, also for photocopying and things like that years ago, I just found it worked the best. So I've always been, in fact, when it comes to design, I tend to like simplicity in design. So like for me, I really love black and white artwork. I love black and white photography. I love monochromatic painting. So for me, black and white, black's just the perfect ink.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, kind of talking about like analog, I'm like, this really helps me to just write more because I don't know, just because I enjoy it. But for me, the colors help me. Although I'm sure you have the experience of like all the colors with painting. And so, I use my fountain pens for that for me.
That's great.
So, okay, tell me about, your books. How many do you have now? And tell me about each one.
So I have two, both self-published. The first book is called An Artful Life, Inspirational Stories and Essays for the Artist and Everyone. I wrote that a couple years ago. That actually is a collection of my short stories and articles from when I was writing for Fine Art Views. And as I mentioned before, I'm really partial to those stories because that was before I started studying copywriting and learning how to write for the internet more. And so they're very artful stories and articles. I used to sit at home after when I get off work with my laptop, and I get somewhere comfortable with a cup of coffee, and I just dream up these stories and articles. And every week I publish for Fine Art Views, and in return they used to comp my website for me with Fine Art Studio Online. So that was where my relationship with them began. But I published that a couple years ago. I went through CreateSpace. I think now they're KDP or something like that. But I went through CreateSpace, had a good experience with CreateSpace. And I put it up on Facebook, and was able to sell a lot of copies. Nothing, spectacular, but I didn't really write it to make a ton of money. I wrote it just to get my work out there. And I think as a writer, it's always helpful when you have published work you can show people on your website or that they can purchase online. And then just this last year, I had a lot of readers that were asking me about my cartoons and if I have a little collection of cartoons. And so I thought, well, I ought to put together a little gallery of cartoons. So I went through BookBaby and used BookBaby to do the cartoon book. And all that is just a collection of my best cartoon illustrations from a lot of my Medium articles. And I incorporated short commentary with each cartoon. It's about 60 pages. It's like $14.95. I put it together not so much to make a ton of money, but again, just to have a collection of my cartoons out there. And so those are the two. And I've considered, as I keep going forward in my writing career, looking at other opportunities for writing. Of course, we all think about traditional publishing, and I know a lot of agents look to see what kind of readership you have. So that's a big part of why you need to write online and build up a following, because that's part of the credibility that they calculate when they decide whether or not they want to work with you as far as getting an agent. So.
Yes, exactly. I'm going through that right now, and I'm just like, oh, actually, I heard from an agent, and they were like I was surprised. I paid them to critique my book proposal, and they were like, really strong writing. I'm like, oh, like, thank you. And so because before I wasn't hearing from anyone, so I'm like, I don't know, is it because my writing's not good enough, or is it because I don't know how to write a book proposal, or obviously my audience not being as big. So that is like a big part that I'm still needing to work on for the traditionally published.
But following that, I talked to a few authors. I reached out to one woman a year or two ago. I'm blanking on her name right now, doggone it. But she wrote a really wonderful story. It was her first fiction book, and I emailed her out of the blue and said, "Hey, I'm just curious. How did you get your start? Because I couldn't find a blog really for her or a big online presence." And she's like, I love to write, and I'm a big reader, and I wrote this manuscript, and I just threw it out there to agents, and someone found it, and they ran with it. So it does happen. If it's really well written, there is that serendipity that can happen. But I think for a lot of agents, they want to look at not just the quality of your writing, but what kind of presence do you have? Because it's a huge financial gamble when they take on another writer. Even an agent, agents, but it can happen. The other thing is being prepared. I did an interview a year ago with a pretty popular podcast, and the guy at the end of the podcast says, "Hey, I don't know if you're working on something right now, but if you ever want to talk to my agent, and I'm like, I'd love to, and then I'll put her in touch with you, and then she emails me and says, do you have a manuscript? You're working on something? Well, no, I just thought I was going to talk to her like an idiot. I didn't have a script. Like, well, no, I write a lot. And so I learned an important lesson, which is, you got to be prepared. You got to have to have work ready to go. You have to have a manuscript, something ready to go. So obviously now I'm gonna work on a project, and then when I have something that I think I'm really proud of, then I'll start shopping agents and see if it can go somewhere.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so back to your cartoon book, you said there's like commentary. Do you mean like you describe how you did the cartoon, how you came up with it, or you write about a topic?
No, there'll be. I had an option when I put these cartoons in this book. I thought, well, they're not going to make sense to people because they're taken as illustrations out of an article. So they're not, the cartoons in and of don't stand alone for the most part. You got a guy standing with a woman in a wheelchair and there's a quote, and you wonder, well, what's this about? There's ducks around it. So what I had to do was I had to share brief quotes or a short paragraph under the cartoons, sort of setting the stage for what this is about. And so they're just brief, and sometimes it's pretty self-explanatory. But it's inspirational. It's a small paragraph. It's mostly about the visuals, about the cartoons, but each page has just a small commentary underneath or an inspirational quote that goes with the cartoon. And some I explain. One is of a football player who has only one hand, and he made it in professional football. And so I wrote underneath that cartoon. It's just a cartoon or a drawing of the guy in his football uniform, and he's missing one hand if you look closely. And underneath it, I wrote about how we can all overcome adversity if we want to. There's ways to work around our shortcomings. And I think I had an inspirational quote in there as well. So it's stuff like that. It's a quick read, kind of a coffee table thing people can look at and enjoy. And that was my intent behind it.
That's so cool. Okay. So what is there that we can do for you right now, like that would be the best or most helpful? Would it be to get one of your books, read it, share your blog, your article, sign up for your newsletter? Like, what are you most looking for at this moment?
Well, I'm just happy to have the honor to be on your show here and talk about these things. I only say people can check me out if they want to at my website. I'm always happy to have newsletter subscribers if they like my work. But I don't want people to sign up for a newsletter if they're not interested. I mean, sometimes people have free giveaways. They give away lead magnets and free books and all kinds of things, and then they wonder why their followers disappear later after they got the free goodie. Well, it's because you want people that sign up because they really like the content. So I write about life. I write about life lessons, personal development. I try to write inspirational stories. I try to share entertaining artwork and cartoons to go with those articles. And if it helps people in their lives or entertains them, then I'm happy. And I stopped worrying about how many newsletter followers I get, and I just mostly want to hopefully impact on people's lives positively. So come to my website if they want to, or just sign up for my newsletter. I'm happy.
Okay, perfect. So I will link to it in the description, but can you just go ahead and tell us your website?
So I've got a million domain names for my website, but the main one is johnpweiss.com. So johnpweiss.com, or jpweiss.com, or johnpatrickweiss.com, or weisscartoons.com. I mean, I got so many, but
it all links back to the same one.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's so funny. John Patrick, that's actually my father's name as well. So that's interesting. It is. Okay, well, is there anything else, any final words you want to share of just encouragement for creative people? The whole thing has really been encouraging and helpful, but
what did Hemingway wrote? A man can be destroyed but not defeated. And I was thinking about that during this current crisis we're in with the viruses and all that. My advice with people is stay healthy. If you're creative, keep putting your work out there and focus on improving your work, especially since we have a lot of downtime right now. Put that time, if you have it, into your art, whatever your art is, because, it's the people that stand out are the ones who are at the top of their game with their writing, with their painting, with their music, whatever it is, their photography. So that's my advice: is invest in learning and keep growing and don't give up.
That's so good. Thank you.